Hello, everybody! We are back with more Nintendo Week. I am Colin McIsaac, the host of this podcast, and I am joined, as always, by Alex Plant.
Now with more microtransactions.
And Ben LeMoreau.
Now with no microtransactions.
So, we are talking about Nintendo and Capcom. We all think that Nintendo should buy out Capcom, and we think there are some pretty dang good reasons why. So, Ben, you're the one who really has this big solid plan. So do you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, my master plan. Well, I wrote an editorial about this a while back when Capcom first was made available for purchase. They had this series of agreements in place so that none of the investors could all sell their stock to one particular owner, so that nobody could gain a majority share of the company. And during an annual meeting, they voted on some of their policies, and they voted by a slim margin not to renew that anti-takeover policy. So Capcom is now officially open to be bought, but, it's not necessarily that they're actively looking for a suitor. But Nintendo has more than enough money to acquire them. Their market cap now is sitting at about $1.27 billion. Now, at the time that they turned down the takeover policies, it was right at $1 billion, which means it only would have cost Nintendo $500 million to buy a majority share in the company. Now it would be a lot more expensive. It would be, over $600 million. But it's still basically a drop in the bucket for Nintendo. And the idea I proposed is that Nintendo, when they came out with Wii U, said they didn't want to be seen anymore as just like the company that appeals to younger audiences. They wanted to expand. They wanted to attract more of the core gamer audience. And a few years into Wii U's life cycle, that's clearly not the case. You're seeing very little third-party support outside of, there's been a few mature games like Bayonetta and Devil's Third, but for the majority, most third-party companies aren't giving Nintendo any attention whatsoever. And my idea, essentially, is that Nintendo's working on a new console. We know that now. They've got the NX in the works. And buying out a company like Capcom gives them the ability to rebrand themselves to start the new generation off. As in, if you launch a new console with, Mario on it and, like, a party game and a fitness game, then chances are you're going to continue to attract the same kind of audience that you've been attracting for a while, and you're going to continue to turn away third-party developers. But if you buy out a company like Capcom now, and you launch a new console 2 years from now, that means you can launch with some of Capcom's more popular and more mature IPs. One of the games in particular that I pointed out in the editorial was that Street Fighter would be an excellent choice for expanding Nintendo's audience, but unfortunately for Nintendo, that's not going to happen now, since Street Fighter V is a platform exclusive on PlayStation.
Well, not if Nintendo bought him out.
Yeah, that's definitely something they could change. And what I found interesting about that is, about 18 months ago, the producer of Street Fighter was asked, hey, when are you guys going to make Street Fighter V? And he replied with, we don't have the money or the staff to do that. And then all of a sudden, hey, Street Fighter V gets announced, and it's exclusive to PlayStation 4. So that suggests
who funded it.
Yeah, exactly. That suggests to me that, not only was Capcom available for purchase, but they've been looking for someone who can finance some of their IPs. I'm sure there's other games that Capcom would love to, return to, but they can't just because they don't have the cash. They've been financially struggling for a couple years. Monster Hunter's helped them turn that around a little bit. So you've got this company, Capcom, that has a lot of mature IP, a lot of extremely recognized EP that could bring in new gamers and help Nintendo rebrand themselves. And you've got Nintendo, who's got about $5 billion in the bank and whose stock value has doubled in the past 4 months. So, it just seems like a good fit, especially if Nintendo doesn't want to repeat the mistakes of Wii U with their next console.
That was very thorough.
I like how you say they have other games that they might want to bring back. And I kind of imagined you saying that with a wink and a nudge because, you have Mega Man, the elephant in the room, which Capcom has been basically ignoring from a development standpoint.
They have been graciously letting Nintendo handle Mega Man licensing.
Precisely, with the Virtual Console releases, with Smash Bros.
Obviously, costumes, Mario Kart costumes, potentially Ryu.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see.
We'll see.
But that would be the logical way for a Mega Man game to get made, is to at least through a partnership with Nintendo. I mean, obviously, an all-out ownership of Capcom would be an easier way to get it done, I think.
Right, and Capcom also has a lot of franchises that recently have been just itching. Their fans have been just itching for better games. Resident Evil's a prime example. Resident Evil 6 was not very popular. People are really amped up to see a true Resident Evil reboot.
Well, let me temper your comment about Resident Evil 6 not being very popular. It is Capcom's third best selling game of all time.
And they still said it undersold expectations and lost the money, so they were expecting somehow
after Street Fighter 2, after Street Fighter 2 and Resident Evil 5.
No, okay. Well, I stand corrected on Resident Evil, but they have Devil May Cry, they have Okami, they have a lot of things that people are really begging for, and I think those kinds of games with those kinds of attitudes would serve Nintendo really well in this rebranding that Ben's talking about, in winning over hardcore gamers to say, look, this is the console that has Mario and Donkey Kong and Zelda, and it's the console that has Resident Evil and Street Fighter.
And a lot of those titles you just mentioned were developed by Clover Studios, the former branch of Capcom that got shut down, which has now essentially reformed as Platinum Games, which has had a very close relationship
Capcom,
with Nintendo.
By Platinum,
well,
by
I'm
Rare,
not so much saying they should buy Platinum.
No,
it's
I know. I'm just saying
if they controlled those IPs and they already have, Platinum has a lot of experience working with Wii U already, then you could start to see some of the original developers of like Okami and Devil May Cry, using the IP again.
Yeah, I mean, I think Platinum Studios would be very happy if Nintendo acquired Capcom's IP so that Kamiya could work on all those games again.
I mean, this makes sense for Nintendo from another perspective too, which is not just widening their audience, but widening their game lineup, just period. Because a lot of the comments that we've seen about Wii U are that the game release schedule is just so thin. Even from a first party perspective, they've been releasing a decent amount of games, but certainly nothing to fill we've had a couple dry months these last couple months.
Mm-hmm. And what games we do get, Mario Party 10, are not very good.
They're filler.
At all.
They're pure filler. And this would be an opportunity to have more meat in the schedule.
And along with, rebranding the console for gamers so that they can see, this isn't just a kiddie console or whatever, is that if you have some of Capcom's mature IP launching on the console, then you could see other third-party developers starting to get in line. It can be rebranded from a developer standpoint as well, because, no one wants to release, Mass Effect or, Grand Theft Auto, things like that. They don't want to release them on a console alongside Mario and Splatoon. It's just not going to cater to that audience. But you launch it alongside Resident Evil and Street Fighter, and you've got a game that can sell, even if, Nintendo's next console isn't superior hardware. As we've seen, their hardware is often technically lagging behind PlayStation and Xbox, but it doesn't matter, just because if you have good games, there's going to be an audience.
The name of the game is the game, is what Nintendo and Sega always used to say, and I mean it's always been true, but I think it would especially prove really useful for Nintendo to follow that philosophy now that they have now that the gaming market is so stringently divided between Nintendo's fans and the main gaming fans, who really are divided between PlayStation and Xbox.
Well, it's also, to follow on from that comment, Capcom is a developer that has experience developing in that space, which is something, Nintendo's acquired Monolith Soft, who previously developed for PlayStation, and I want to say a lot of Retro Studios people probably had background in other gaming areas outside just Nintendo, which is why
I believe a lot of the ones who made Metroid Prime made the original Halo.
Right, and that's kind of where I was going with that. Metroid Prime is evidence that, if you bring in outside talent that's had outside experience with different games that Nintendo normally makes, you have the opportunity to bring not necessarily just Capcom's IP, but Capcom's development expertise in areas that Nintendo doesn't have that expertise in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Retro Studios formed, a lot of the employees were formerly from Iguana Studios, which created Turok.
Oh, that actually explains a lot.
So I don't want to get too deep into the Mega Man discussion, because we're actually going to have something pretty similar to that in another one of these podcast episodes coming up soon. But
well, I mean, Mega Man is the type of game that I think would work on a Nintendo console.
Of course.
You also have new IP that Capcom's working on, like Deep Down, which would be good answers to a lot of games on other consoles like Dark Souls. It definitely is an acquisition that would make sense for Nintendo. The question is whether Capcom agrees.
Right. I don't know. I mean, if Capcom is worth $600 million and Nintendo comes in with $700 million and says we're going to buy you, I don't know that I don't know that Capcom's going to have the leverage
yeah,
to say,
the key
no,
thing to
not.
look at is, like I said, the voting down of the takeover defenses, it was really close. I want to say it was like 51 to 49% or 52 to 48. So that means you have to convince basically every single investor who has any interest in selling to sell.
Yeah.
Because almost half of them don't want to.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly not a done deal or anything. It's not something that instantly would make sense for Capcom. Especially since, for example, Street Fighter is, believe it or not, the lead platform is PC, and I don't see that being something that can just go away because Nintendo acquires them. Even now that Sony's funding Street Fighter V, it's obviously still coming to PC. So
Right. Well, I think part of the deal for Capcom is with Nintendo funding them, they would have the funds for a lot of projects like that. Like Ben said, they didn't have the money to make Street Fighter V. Part of Nintendo's big investment is not just in buying Capcom, but in investing in all the games that they're working on to release them as part of Nintendo's long-term strategy. Give them the funds to work on games for Wii U and 3DS or NX or whatever. Really NX and the next generation of consoles. But give them those funds and those development resources, and they're not having to work off their own pocket. They're working off of Nintendo's pocket, and that's a huge benefit for them.
And it might actually be a bit of a tough sell to Nintendo's investors as well, just because Nintendo has just finally started turning a profit again after 3 consecutive years of operating losses where, something like $600 million went down the drain, and now they'd be turning around and dropping that same amount of money to make a pretty big investment, which would then require other smaller investments into the individual games. So, Nintendo's investors are pretty happy right now with the way the stock prices are up, but even so, a $600 million plus investment into a company is a big thing to ask when you've just come off of 3 consecutive years of losses.
Yeah, and I can't remember the last time when a gaming company acquired another actually successful gaming company and didn't somehow destroy it within a decade.
EA does it all the time.
Exactly. Maxis.
Look at how successful Maxis and
Nintendo's big acquisitions so far, I would say, have been Retro Studios and Monolith Soft, neither of whom were heavyweight developers, and they've done pretty well, joining with Nintendo because Nintendo enabled to do things that they really couldn't do. But Capcom's a competent developer, with experience, with a decent business, I would say. So,
right,
it's not. This wouldn't be a normal acquisition by any means. It'd be very risky.
Right. It would be a very big merger, but nonetheless, I think, but Nintendo should buy them. I think we all agree.
I mean, if any company's IP would strengthen Nintendo's and would make sense for them to acquire, it would be Capcom.
At least the argument I'm putting forth is that Nintendo needs something like that, and Capcom is the one who can offer that.
If Nintendo wants to rebrand themselves as a company with a broader audience and not just the family-friendly company,
which they should want to.
I agree. Then yes, I think Capcom is the ideal choice for that expansion, because you're not going to come up with 4, 5, 6 successful new IPs all within the first 2 or 3 years of NX. It's just not going to happen. But with Capcom, you have those established already, and all you got to do is throw some money at them, put it on a little Nintendo Touch, and there you go.
Right. And I think it's been clear for a long, long time that Nintendo can't do the kids-only thing anymore.
No, certainly not.
Their consoles are on an incredible downward trend ever since the NES. The Wii was, by all means, the exception because it just hit on this mass market trend that basically invented the casual market. But every other one of their consoles has sold progressively worse than the last, and that's largely because they're narrowing their audience only to the people. I mean, they make magical games, but their audience, they do. But they're narrowing their audience only to the people who care about that. They're not keeping their audience as broad as they were in the Nintendo and Super Nintendo days when they said, "Okay, let's let Mortal Kombat have blood in it because now it's got a T or M rating or whatever it was back on Super Nintendo." They're not saying that. They're saying our games are gonna have, our guns are gonna shoot paint, and our Mario is gonna grow tall and smile everywhere.
And we've seen them take a few strides, like I said, with Bayonetta 2 acquiring that, you know, they were looking for a funder, Nintendo stepped up, and then Devil's Third as well. But it's, you know, a day late and a dollar short when you do that a couple years into a console's lifespan after it's already been firmly established as the kiddie console.
What they need is an announcement at, say, like E3 2016 that says, here's what NX is. Bam, Street Fighter. Bam, Resident Evil. Bam, Zelda. Bam, Metroid.
Yeah. These can't be the exceptions. They kind of have to be the rule.
Right. And, you know, what we've seen so far, Bayonetta, Devil's Third, they're obviously the exceptions to the rule on Wii U.
And they're honestly kind of out there as far as mature titles go. They're not very mass market appealing sorts of games.
Not in the way that Resident Evil 6, Capcom's third best-selling game ever.
Or even some of their new projects like Lost Planet or that Deep Down thing. Those look like they're very in with the times, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I think Nintendo should buy Capcom.
I second that motion.
I agree. I think I'd honestly think they'd be in a better position if they bought a Western studio, but they're not very good at the Western relations thing. So if there's any Capcom, Japanese studio, it should be Capcom.
Right. And Capcom is the most Western that Eastern studios get. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, well, awesome. Thank you guys so much for listening. This is the Endo Nintendo Week for today. If you like this podcast, please subscribe to us on iTunes or subscribe to us on YouTube at Gamnesia TV for bite-sized discussions from the show. And please head to iTunes to leave us a review. It really helps with visibility, so we greatly appreciate it, especially if you have good things to say instead of bad ones. If you can't wait until next week for more of our stuff, you can head to Gamnesia.com to see more gaming news as it happens. We got Sony, Microsoft, Indie, Capcom, you name it, and even Nintendo news that we didn't have the time to discuss on this week's show. If you have questions or feedback for Nintendo Week, please send it to colin@Gamnesia.com. And finally, thank you so much for listening, and we hope you have another great week.